Okay, so we're here with David. David, what are you doing at the Reason Rally?
Well, I'm just here hanging out with 20 or 30,000 of my closest secular, humanist, atheist, agnostic, free-thinking friends as a big show of support for the idea that you don't have to be, you don't have to be bad if you're a non-believer. You can be good without God.
Have you ever been skeptical about skeptics?
Well, I mean, a true skeptic is skeptical about everything. So you bring it's not just being a curmudgeon or a naysayer to things, it's about questioning everything. So, of course, the people who are dogmatic, and it doesn't matter what they believe, if they're dogmatic, it should be a natural urge to say, well, why? And can you go further with that? So, yeah, I'm all about questioning, well, you say you believe or don't believe, or, let's talk about that. Why?
You know, Dr. Lawrence Cross is going to be here, or is going to be one of the speakers here. You a fan of his?
I know the name. I can't say I'm directly familiar with the.
You know, Dr. Cross said, "You are all stardust."
Yes.
He was giving a lecture. You agree with that?
Absolutely. Science. I mean, I'm also a big fan of Neil deGrasse Tyson, and who is kind of repeated that. Yeah, I mean, at the atomic level, we're all made of star stuff. So, absolutely.
So, if that statement's true, how do you, as an atheist, because you appealed already in this conversation, you appealed to being good, to being bad. Mm-hmm. How do you, as Stardust, who has accepted his his position in this universe as Stardust, how do you have morals?
Well, that is something that is, incredibly important to me, because that's a lot of things I hear from conservative and religious right, is that atheists are without morals. They can't be, just because it's a matter of if you don't believe this, you don't have them. And I don't believe that's true at all. Part of the human condition is understanding that we are in this together, and part of the whole idea that we are a community, whether it's a literal local community or a global one. That togetherness, that need, makes things, it's almost evolutionary. I honestly believe that we have to have kind of an ingrained moral sense as a matter of survival. Some of those ideas, thou shalt not kill your neighbor, shall not kill, period, aren't necessarily just edicts from a higher power. They are evolutionary guidelines. Like, you can't survive as a species if you kill each other. So these are all things.
Is that what Darwin taught?
I don't know that Darwin went that far with it. I do think, I'm applying some of kind of evolution to, a little bit different thing, or different ideas. But I absolutely think that some of the things that are, I think, inherently moral and good come from bigger things, from very fundamental, we are creatures that need to survive together and live together, work together, love together. These are very important concepts.
Yeah, because, you keep referring to evolution as if evolution is some sort of guiding principle that's guiding everything into a good place. I mean, that's what it sounds like, that evolution protects us from unraveling into some, I would assume, some immoral, evil, some bad state, of humanity, that evolution is somehow guiding the process along. But that Darwin actually believed in natural selection. He believed in, I guess, the survival of the fittest, and he also believed in the preservation of higher races. Do you think that evolution is really teaching us to love thy neighbor?
Well, there's a lot going on in what you just said. First of all, I don't think that evolution is a guiding principle, that it's an underlying intent. Evolution and natural selection don't have intent. It's purely the effect of what survives versus what doesn't. So it's not like this kind of umbrella, top-down kind of work thing. It's just a matter of, this works, this random mutation happens, this worked, this didn't. The things that worked and benefited the species or whatever survived. That's just how it worked out. So to talk about what Darwin did or didn't believe personally, I think is moot. I don't think it matters.
Fair enough. So as as somebody that accepts, let's say evolution accepts, the somewhat humorous statement, we're all stardust, or whatever. Do you think that you really have the basis for human dignity.
Absolutely. Again, I absolutely.
How does Stardust give itself dignity?
Well, it's because of whatever you call our existence, our consciousness, if you believe in a soul, that our human experience is what makes that idea possible. It's not.
That's what the Humanist Manifesto says. Human experience is what gives us morals and meaning and dignity.
I absolutely agree with that.
Does everybody have the same experience as humans?
Of course not. No, of course we don't. I mean, at some level we do because we're humans. But everybody's individual choices, decisions, experiences. I mean, just look at the varied parts of this country and around the world in terms of living conditions and socioeconomic statuses and those kinds of things. Of course our experiences are different, but at some level they are common.
So, as a non-atheist, as an atheist, because I'm a theist, I'm a Christian theist, okay? I do believe that meaning, morals, and beauty come to us from our Creator, from God, revealed to us in the Bible, very clearly spelled out to us in the Bible. But if you reject the idea of a Creator, do you also reject the idea that morals, meaning, beauty, dignity, all of these things, purpose, are these transcendent things, or are they merely subjective? You see what I'm trying to get at? In other words, the sense of dignity that an atheist places on his infant child, does that child actually have dignity, or is that just a convention of man?
That's a really interesting question. I mean, again, at the end of the day, I think whether it's created by ourselves, like we as, again, a society kind of grew that out of nothing, or it's not dictated to us, or it doesn't exist without our finding it, if you will. I think it doesn't matter. At the end of the day, we have to, again, as a society or as a people, find those things. So it's one of my kind of big credos is truth exists regardless of your belief in it or your ability to find it. So I think the things you mentioned, truth and beauty and dignity, all those things are in fact underlying, I think, human truths. I mean, they're there to be found. Not everyone experiences them. Not everyone recognizes them. And it's simply a matter of that's our mission in life, is to find out the things that are true and beautiful and good.
So, okay, so David, not to just to ratchet up the conversation a little bit, okay? I want to try to, you're an atheist, you're proud of it, you're here, you've got the stickers on, you got the t-shirt on, but would it be fair to say that you didn't really answer the question of does that infant actually possess dignity, or is it just a mere convention? In other words, is it subjective?
Well, that's a good, to be truly honest, and this is, I think, an aspect of skepticism and free thinking, the answer is I don't know.
Fair enough.
We don't have to know the answers to these things. We just have to seek the answers.
Yeah, as coming from a biblical worldview, part of the reason why I'm a Christian is because my assertion is that none of the other competing worldviews can account for where we get the laws of logic, where we get the laws of morality, where we get truth, absolute truth, where we get morals, meaning, and beauty, dignity. Where do we get purpose for mankind? My proposition, well, we totally disagree here, but my proposition is that atheism, like agnosticism or skepticism, cannot give you the basis for the most fundamental aspects of human experience. That's our claim, and so have you thought deeply enough about that?
Yeah, I think I have. I think, clarifying my thought on this, I do believe that it's inherent to the human condition. Like, it doesn't have to be, dictated to, or we don't have to find it through a book or a teaching or whatever. It's in us. It is there for us to find.
Do you understand that in reality there really aren't any brute facts? I don't know if you've thought about that, but the Christian position is that brute facts don't exist, that every fact is interlocked with other facts, and that's the way the universe works. You know what I mean? Who gave birth to you is who gave birth to that person, and who gave birth to that. There's always a succession and interlocking of facts. So because the world runs in that way, we would say nothing stands alone. The idea that there is no God is undergirded by other philosophical presuppositions. Have you really thought about what presuppositions govern atheism?
Well, I think the very definition of atheism is starting from no presupposition. So when you're...
You think so?
I absolutely think that. The idea that... the idea of a God, at least in my belief is that this was something that we created as a kind of a primitive way to understand how the universe works. But if you logically and as a critical thinker, how logic and science works is you don't start with assumptions. You start with observation and then you go from there. You ask questions. So the bottom line being, some of those fundamental questions like, well, how and why are we here? We don't start with an assumption that there is a specific purpose or reason. We have to start from nothing and go from there. And I think as humans, if we were born on a deserted island with no influence from anything, those are things we'd have to find for ourselves anyway.
So wouldn't you agree, though, David, that the logical resolve not to begin with any assumptions is an assumption?
Well, I mean, I guess you could argue anything is. I mean, we're getting kind of esoteric and metaphysical a little bit.
A little bit, because metaphysically, many philosophers have concluded that, in fact, we all have governing presuppositions. The question is what worldview can account for their presuppositions? See what I'm saying? So, for example, can I illustrate this for a second? So, for example, if a person doesn't believe in the laws of logic, somebody may ask, what is the proof that the laws of logic exist? And someone has said, you know that the laws of logic exist by the attempt to deny them. In denying the laws of logic, you assume and assert and use the laws of logic. You see what I'm saying?
A little bit. I mean, the point of logic, you're kind of defining logic as a totemic, top-down institution. But logic is a series of just thinking. It's just a way of asking a question, being able to answer it with some amount of certainty, and being able to reproduce those same results. So, not believing in logic works whether you believe it or not.
That's right. So do you believe in the universal laws of logic?
Absolutely.
How does a stardust chance universe, you didn't say that, but I'm saying this, how does a stardust chance universe create an abstract law like logic?
I think it's just, this is a little metaphysical and whatnot, but I think we as finite beings with our puny little human brains can't comprehend things that are in fact universal to a certain extent. Whether you believe in God or not, certain concepts are outside our grasp. Trying to understand something that, like, well, where did the laws of logic come from? There is no come from law. That's what they are. They just exist.
The laws of logic are eternal?
I would say they are universal and, I would say they eternal. Basically, it's not a dictated process. Logic is logical. I mean, it's kind of like, it's a very Zen kind of thing, I suppose, but at the end of the day, you're not talking about somebody sat down and wrote these down. The laws of logic can be followed. They cannot be followed by people who say they are following them. They are people who say they subscribe to them. But it's not this is the list. There's a single list of logic laws, and these are the rules. What is logical is logical. I don't know how to boil it down any more fundamentally than that.
I agree that the laws of logic are, to some extent, axiomatic. They are self-evident. I believe that they are universal, abstract, invariant laws that do not change, that govern human thinking. But what I cannot accept, because, and I think you would agree with me based on observation, nothing can't give us something, including nothing cannot give us a law.
I don't know that I agree with that, because
have you ever seen nothing give us something before?
Well, of course I have observed it, but the point is there's assumptions built into even that what is nothing. Well, what you're assuming is nothing. So I mean, this is where things kind of get just fuzzy in terms.
I only say that because you reject the idea of a God.
Well, here's you can say that, evolutionists and science people believe in, the Big Bang, that something came from nothing and then we have everything. Well, I think I personally don't think that's how it works. Again, coming back to this idea that we can't comprehend infinity, even if the Big Bang was in fact the source of this current iteration of the universe, if you want to call it that, it's infinity. So whether it's a matter of an expansion and collapse and an expansion and collapse, it's infinite. There was no one thing. It's just what is.
Yeah, and the reality is that, you know, the reason we're not atheists is because we believe that in order for an atheist to make sense of his worldview, he has to borrow from theistic, I would say exclusively Christian theistic principles. I know you don't agree with that, but in other words, if you want to assign dignity to your infant child, you will have to borrow from what we would say stem from the Christian worldview, the idea that that child has more dignity than the dignity of a tomato. So that if you go splat with a tomato and splat with an infant on the concrete, you have not done the same thing. There's not an equal ultimacy there. There is an inherent, I would say there is a transcendent distinction, but a chance universe does not possess the ability to give us transcendent morals or transcendent meaning. That's why Bertrand Russell said life is meaningless. That's why I think Strauss would say you are nothing more than stardust. That's why many paleontologists, astrophysicists, you name it, many philosophers from an atheist perspective, they have confessed that life is meaningless. If we're seeking to define meaning in some transcendent way outside of this materially closed system, there is no such thing as meaning. I mean, are you okay living that way?
Yeah, because at the end of the day, that is how we start. Naked and small and helpless.
Could you be wrong about everything?
Of course. I mean, that is part of logic and reason and scientific thinking, is a matter of you always hold the possibility that you're wrong. We are not absolutists, or at least I'm not, about anything. It's like if undeniable evidence could be demonstrated to me, then it's undeniable. You know, like if I see those things. But the idea that you have to assign dignity to a child, I think, is a wrong way. I think the dignity, if it exists, is there, and we find it. I mean, it's just, that's what happens.
At what age are you going to start telling your child that they do not have actual dignity?
I would never say that, because I believe they have dignity always.
But you haven't established the reality of dignity.
It didn't have to be established. They have it. It exists.
What if they ask you, Daddy, why am I different than a tomato?
Because we have, I mean, that's a philosophical question.
A child can ask you that.
Of course, and that's a question as an adult, and I don't have children. But
it's the atheist position that we just say, just because.
Well,
you don't need to know.
No, not at all. I mean, I think that's the whole point of questioning things, is to, you know, that's a serious philosophical question. What makes dignity? Where does it come from? Does it exist? Is it entirely in our imaginations? Is it a purely human creation? And it could very well be that it is. I mean, I don't think that there's anything that says this exists outside of our experience. It's just, if it exists, it's something maybe that we created.
David, a friend of mine asked this question. I think it's a good question. Could you be wrong about everything you claim to know?
It's possible, yeah.
Then if that's possible, doesn't it follow, and follow me closely because I don't want to put any words in your mouth or caricature you in any way, but doesn't it follow then that you know nothing for certain?
Sure. I mean, yes. You have to concede the point that if we, as part of our argument, say everything that we believe and understand could be upended immediately, but here's the thing. It's like questioning gravity. At some point, all the evidence that we've ever seen, experienced, at every person you've ever talked to has the same experience of gravity. We can test it, we can reproduce it, we can demonstrate it. So for gravity to not exist as we understand it would be a revolutionary surprise. It would be so unlikely as to be virtually impossible. And some of those things like science and reason and logic, some of those things that we get to about that, and some of these things we've been talking about are far more philosophical than they are practical, I think, once you analyze them deeply enough and go through, experience them over and over again, or just, again, that's our entire life is spent hashing those things out. Once we kind of gain a certain amount of momentum and groundswell and just data about, it becomes a pretty big mountain to say this is not likely. It might be wrong, but it's a very small chance that it is.
And so, David, the last thing I guess I would leave you with is that, as a Christian theist, I believe that the only way, kind of like the laws of logic I told you earlier, how do you establish the validity of logic, try to deny it. And so I would say the same thing with Christianity. How do you know for certain that Christianity is true? Because of the impossibility of the contrary. By denying it, you actually assume Christianity. And that's a tall claim, but I say that because you will appeal ultimately to morality, to logic, to reason, to dignity, to morals, meaning, and beauty, all of which I would contend, I'm not here to contend for a general deity. I'm here exclusively for the Christian deity, okay? And any minute that you wish to, refute Islam or Buddhism, I will actually join you in refuting those other concepts of a deity. So I am arguing, like the Bible tells me to, exclusively for the triune God of the Bible. And that's why the Bible says all of the treasures of knowledge are hidden in Christ. Epistemology is derivative of Christianity. And I don't know if you thought about that, but I challenge you to think about that. You're a free thinker, so you're free to think about that. I thank you so much for the interview. Thanks for being a sport and being willing to do this. So have fun for the rest of your day, man. Thank you, Dave.